Hello and welcome to this DDI CADcast. My name is Cody Armstrong, and the topic for today is What's New 2013 Assemblies. So thank you for joining us for this What's New CADcast on Assemblies. And this is going to be part one of a two-part series on Assemblies, just because we have a lot of content to get through. So I want to start off with these features. First thing I want to get into is assembly visualization, some of the new features for assembly visualization in 2013, as well as new functionality for breaking all external references in one place. Deleting components and subassemblies has some changes in it that I'd like to get into, as well as some enhancements to derived components. Envelopes got an overhaul for the 2013 release, so we'll get into that, as well as support for multiple exploded views per configuration. Lastly, I'd like to get into some enhancements to the insert components command in SOLIDWORKS 2013. So let's jump right into it and get into assembly visualization. So let's bring up an example of assembly visualization. And I'm just going to call up an assembly, and we'll go to the Tools, Assembly Visualization command. One of the first things I want to point out are a few of the new properties I can sort by in assembly visualization. So if I go to More, I'm going to hit this drop down, and you'll notice a few new properties that weren't there in previous versions. For instance, flexible subassembly. I can now sort by whether the file is a flexible subassembly or not. Okay? Also, we have external references. Does the file have external references? Yes or no? It's another way we can sort the assembly. Is it fully mated? Okay, so it's just a different way to filter through. Also, we have this option for graphics triangles. So graphics triangles would be particularly helpful in very large assemblies where I may be having performance issues and I want to see what the most complex parts in my assembly are. Graphics triangles will tell me how many graphics triangles that model has and therefore how complicated it may be. Another one is converted to current version. This will tell me whether the file's been converted to the current version. And we also have excluded from BOM. But these are new properties I can sort by in assembly visualization. You can tell they're very much yes/no properties. But it just gives us a little bit more flexibility when we're visualizing our assembly. Now the next thing I want to point out is this grouped and ungrouped view button here. In the previous versions, all assembly visualization was grouped. But now you can ungroup the data. So right now it's lumped these two together, quantity 2, but if I go to ungroup, it now breaks them apart, and they're listed as two separate line items. So this may be helpful for instance-specific properties, right? Like excluded from bill of materials, right? I could have one of the instances excluded, but not necessarily all of them. And I can switch back and forth by just clicking on this icon, grouped, ungrouped view command. So let me show you an example of this. Let's just do a sort. Okay, we'll bring up a property here. Let's call excluded from BOM. Okay, so we'll link to excluded from BOM. And you'll see here it gives me no or yes depending on the status of that model. Okay, but this is an example of an instance-specific property. You may have one instance excluded, but not necessarily all of them. So that's an example where the grouped and ungrouped comes into play. You may have an instance-specific property, and you want to be able to sort by that using the grouped, ungrouped view command. So that's group, ungrouped view. The next thing I'd like to get into, let's go ahead and sort by mass, is when I color the models. Okay, you'll see the toggle color. Go ahead and go back. Let's go back to a grouped view. And I'll color the model, and we're going to do a group identical. Okay, so I right click, group identical. What you'll notice now is they're a consistent color. And the order that the colors come in is now controlled. Okay, in previous versions it was completely random what colors got chosen. Well, now in the tools options under colors, you'll see assembly visualization, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. These are the first 6 colors to be called up by assembly visualization. Anything after the 6th color is going to be random, but what's nice about this is if I get out of visualization and then come back, it will have the same colors. In previous versions, it was completely random what colors it associated with it, and when you did it again, chances are they weren't going to be the same because, again, it was random. So group identical, now you can specify what colors you'd like, at least for the first 6, and they are all grouped, and it's no longer a transition. They're solid colors between them. Okay. So let's do this. Let's sort by graphics triangles, hit OK. And now I've sorted by graphics triangles. Again, it's still grouped identically. And again, I was telling you, graphics triangles gives me the amount of triangles this file has. So let's do a section view and take a look at this, because the most complicated files are here in the inside. Okay, so here you'll see this piston seal that has something like 8,000 graphics triangles. Okay, click on the next one, it highlights the rod seal and then an O-ring. But allows me to analyze a model and see where the most complex parts exist. Okay, the parts with the most graphics triangles. So it's just another way to filter through your data, to sort through your data, and I think this is going to be particularly helpful for those in very large assemblies having performance issues. It's an easy way to find my complicated files, my complicated parts. So the next thing I want to go over is the save as. We've had the ability to save as for a while now, and all this does is it creates a list in Excel of the files. But what you'll notice is this new option at the bottom, exclude hidden components. So now if a component is hidden in the assembly, it will be excluded from the save as, from creating the Excel-based list. Okay, so no longer be included in that. Also new for 2013 is the ability to load and save styles in assembly visualization. So I can save a style and then push that style onto other assemblies. In the past, you just had to recreate your layout, and it could have been, you know, I like file quantity and graphics triangles, and I like the grouped view. Well, now you can save all that as a style. Okay, and it creates an Excel file. Of course, you can save it anywhere you like, and what's nice about this is I can push it onto any assembly that I'd like. It captures the columns, the properties, right? And then all I have to do is go back and load style. A few of the other things it captures, it also captures what colors you were using, whether the value bars were on and off, what other properties you had available, and also the sort order and units that you may have been using when you created the style. So the next thing I want to go over are the enhancements to breaking references in SOLIDWORKS 2013. In previous versions of the software, if you wanted to break external references, you had to do it on a per component basis. You had to do it on individual components. Well, now in SOLIDWORKS 2013, you can break external references from the very top level assembly. Okay? So even if you have subassemblies and then components inside that subassembly, you can break external references to all of them in one shot. Now I should give this with a warning. There is no easy way to undo this. So you want to be real clear and make sure that that's in fact what you want to do before you break any references. Let me show you this. If I right clicked and I went list external references, this is how I broke references. But now when I right click the top level assembly, you'll see the same option, list external references. And from here you can break the external references to the entire assembly. Okay? This includes breaking and locking. And it will do it for each of the subassemblies and all of the components of that assembly. So again, I'd like to warn you, before you break all, be careful about what you're doing. Never in the past has it been so easy to break external references to potentially hundreds of different files with one button. And so you want to be careful as you're going through this that you don't do this accidentally. This is not something that can be easily undone. Another nice thing they've added with 2013 is this option, replace broken sketch relations with fixed relations. And essentially what that does is it takes all the on-edge and convert relationships you may have created when you're building the model and converts them to fixed relationships. So anything that gets broken with the break references will turn to a fixed relation. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up this part, and I just want to take a look at the relations and show you what I mean. If I hit display relations, you'll see there's just a series of on-edge relationships. Okay. Now if I were to go back and break the references to this model, Right, so I go up to the top here, list external references, and I hit break all. You're going to get a warning. All external references to the selected model will be broken. You will not be able to activate these references again. Just a final warning letting you know, hey, you're going to break all references of the assembly. I'll hit OK. And now it's going to go through and break all the external references of that assembly. And if we jump back to our part, what I want to point out is if I edit this sketch, all those on-edge relationships are now set to fixed. So no longer is it just an underdefined sketch. Anything that was broken with the break has now been converted to a fixed relation. So no longer does it go completely underdefined like it did in previous versions. So the next thing I want to go over is the changes to deleting components from subassemblies when working in the top level. So when I open up a big top level assembly like this, in previous versions of the software, if I went in the graphics window or in the feature tree and I selected a component that belonged to a subassembly and I hit delete, it would delete the entire subassembly that that component belonged to. Now in the latest version of the software, if I come in here and select, you'll see this file belongs to, it's a few levels deep, but it belongs to a subassembly within the top level. If I select a few of these files that belong to the subassembly and delete them, no longer does it delete the entire subassembly. It will actually just delete those files from the subassembly. Okay? So again, in previous versions, if I did this and hit delete, it would delete the entire subassembly from the model. But now in 2013, it's only going to remove those files from the subassembly. Okay? So it's different behavior than what we got in previous versions of the software. You'll see there it did not remove the entire subassembly. Just those few components that I selected. Okay, so just be aware of that. You're no longer going to get the delete the entire subassembly behavior when you do a delete like that. It's only going to pull it from the assembly. It's only going to delete the files from that assembly. Okay, no longer does it actually remove the entire subassembly from the top level. So let's move on. Alright, so the next thing I want to get into is the enhancements to the derived components in SOLIDWORKS 2013. Now, derived components can be created a number of ways. Inserting a mirror part would be a good example of a derived component. Inserting a part into a part is an example of a derived component. But one of the most common examples is when you're editing an assembly and you're mirroring components over, there's an option to create an opposite hand version. This will also create a derived component. I want to explain one of the new enhancements for derived components in 2013. So for this example, I'm just going to call up the mirror components command. I'm going to mirror about the right plane, and we're going to mirror these three components. Now the option I'm referring to is right here, create opposite hand version. And this certainly isn't new. It's going to create a derived version of the file, derived component that flips and essentially creates a left or right hand version of my file. In previous versions though, I'm going to go ahead and select create opposite hand version. In previous versions of the software, you didn't have control over what got pushed to the derived component. So this is the original. It's creating a mirrored version based on the original, but I never really had options as to whether or not you'd want to bring planes or sketches or properties over. Now in SOLIDWORKS 2013, when I specify which versions are opposite hand versions, in this case it's just the pin, then I hit next, you're going to see these options asking me what would I like to transfer over to the new derived component. And I can bring solid bodies, surface bodies, axes, sketches, custom properties, coordinate systems, all kinds of things I can bring over to the mirrored copy in this case, okay, the derived component. And this is the same dialog, by the way, that you'd get with insert mirror part or insert part when you're inserting and you're working at the part level. Any derived component now should have the option to transfer these certain things over to it, okay? And so what this means is when I'm creating derived components, I no longer have to bring properties across manually or find ways to bring sketches into both parts. I now have options here to control what I'd like to push over to the derived component. So the next thing in the list I'd like to go over are some of the new features to envelopes. And in 2013, envelopes definitely got an overhaul in terms of functionality, how it works. So I'd like to jump into some of that. And I'm going to go ahead and call up this track setting assembly once more. And we'll give it a moment to load. But the problem again in the past with envelopes is you had to think ahead about using an envelope. I couldn't just model an envelope as a normal part and then tell it this is an envelope. You had to think ahead. I had to go insert envelope and essentially build the envelope in context with the assembly. And so it took a specific workflow to use. And I think because of that, not a lot of people really used it. At least not a lot. And I think with new functionality we're introducing with 2013, it makes envelopes much more user-friendly. Okay, because now what I can do is specify any component as an envelope, right? Now, the way I do that is by going into the component properties of whatever I want to make into an envelope. Okay, so as this loads, you'll see here I have this track setting machine, and I'm not really interested in the tracks themselves. Okay, this assembly here, this very first assembly is just the tracks. And I don't make tracks, I'm more interested in the machine, but I need the tracks as a component to understand how the machine is functioning, right? And so this is a perfect example of an envelope component. And in the past, what you would have had to have done is built this in context using envelope-specific tools. But now, with the 2013 release of the software, you can tell any component or subassembly, like in this case, to be an envelope. And the way I do that is by right-clicking the subassembly, going to the component properties, and you'll see an option here for envelope. Okay, I can check envelope. It will automatically exclude it from the bill of materials. And you'll notice when I hit OK, the center of mass will shift as well because the envelope's ignored in center of mass calculation. So now the center of mass is over here. So again, envelopes are now available in the right-click menu. Okay, right-click component properties, and you can make anything into an envelope. Also notice the color that gets associated with envelope components. Okay, so that really hasn't changed much. But just realize now that the envelope command is in the right-click component properties menu. Also, while inserting components, if I go insert component and I just browse, you'll see an option here for making an envelope upon creation of the file. So when you're initially inserting your part, you can tell it to be an envelope then as well. Okay, so again, right-click component properties envelope, or you can make an envelope here. Okay. The other thing I want to point out is when you're in your system options under assemblies, there are now envelope-specific options. Okay, including automatically loading lightweight and the ability to load envelopes read-only. So there are envelope-specific options of the tools options assemblies that help the user using envelopes to just be a little bit simpler. Okay. Also notice that the text for the envelope no longer shows assembly in the name. Okay, in previous versions, whenever it's an envelope, it actually said envelope in the name of the file. Okay. Also, there is no longer an insert envelope. You'll no longer find insert envelope since any file can be made into an envelope. It also means that the envelopes tab is no longer on the configurations tab. Okay. Envelopes are strictly managed on the feature manager tab. Okay. If you were to do a show with dependents, it's no longer going to show envelopes because again, it's not a dependent. And so it gives me a little bit extra functionality. So some of the things to keep in mind about envelopes in 2013 is you can still use select using envelope and show hide using envelope and some of the advanced selection tools that you had in previous versions, but they really only apply to envelopes at the part level. So an example like mine here that is a subassembly, I don't have those advanced selection options. The advanced selection tools really only apply to envelopes made from parts. So just keep that in mind when you're developing your envelope. Is your goal using select using or show hide using, or you like those advanced selection tools, keep in mind that the envelope will need to be a part and not a subassembly like my example here. So I'd like to go through an example of creating multiple exploded views per configuration. And it's a really simple thing to show. When you go and create an exploded view, right, and we'll just create a real basic exploded view here. But now SOLIDWORKS 2013 supports creating multiple exploded views and tying them to a single configuration. So here I'll just create a real basic exploded view, hit OK. And now what you'll notice is if I right click, you'll see the option New Exploded View. In previous versions of the software, this would have been grayed out because again, I was only allowed to create one exploded view per configuration. With the 2013 release, that's no longer the case. I can create multiple exploded views per configuration, and so that option is now available. Okay, so if I click a new exploded view, I can create another exploded view, and again, it is tied to the same configuration. Right, so drag this out, hit OK, and what you'll notice is now I have two exploded views attached to this one configuration. Also nice for the 2013 release is support for Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste via Control-C, Control-V for copying and pasting exploded views. Right, so if I highlight an exploded view here and I click Control-C, it copies it to the clipboard, just like other things in SOLIDWORKS and in Windows in general. And I can go and highlight the configuration I'd like to put that exploded view in, and then click Control-V, which will paste the exploded view into that configuration. We could do this in the past, but we had to Control-drag the exploded view up. Now support for Control-C, Control-V allows the user to use that to copy and paste as well. Now another thing that's worth mentioning is when I make a drawing out of a model that has multiple exploded views, you'll now have an option to define what exploded view you'd like to see. Right, so I'm going to drag an exploded view out here, and what I want to point out is if I look at the very top here, you'll see a drop down that now allows me to specify which exploded view I want to see. Because we support multiple exploded views, you have to give the user the option to choose, and this is where we do it. Okay, so in the details of the drawing view and the properties of the drawing view, you'll see a drop down that allows you to specify which exploded view you'd like to see. It's also in the right click properties menu. Right, so if I right click properties, you'll see that same drop down here as well. So that is multiple exploded views per configurations. Let's go ahead and move on. So the last thing I want to get into in part 1 of this CADcast is the enhancements to insert components. And in previous versions of the software, if you wanted to insert a lot of components into your assembly in one shot, you typically used Windows Explorer. And what I mean by that is you'd call up Windows Explorer, you'd Control Select, Shift Select a series of files, and then just drag and drop into the graphics area. Well, now you can get similar behavior from Insert Component. And in previous versions, Insert Component did not allow you to insert multiple files at a time. Okay? That's no longer the case. So now when I go Insert Component, existing part, okay, and I browse, I can Shift Select a series of files and place them in all at one time. The easiest way to place them all in at one time, right? Let's say, for instance, I just want to put them all over here in this corner, is to just simply double click. That'll place all the files in the assembly all in one shot. Okay? Another way of doing that is inserting one at a time, but just going through a list. Right? So if I browse and I Shift Select those same set of files, I can insert them one at a time. Right? So I know the head. Once I click there, it'll go on to the next one, which is a pillar. I'll click over here, then I'll insert the pin, and then I'll insert the scale, and then lastly this T-pin. So it's a way for me to insert components and dictate where they're going to go instead of just dumping them all in the same exact spot in space. So let me show you another example of this. Now there's a few other ways I can do this. Let me point these out as well. If I go back to Insert Component and I browse, and again I'll just Shift Select a few, I can also place multiple instances of the same component over. And the way I do that is with the push pin. So I select this push pin, and what it'll do is it'll stick it to just this component. So if I needed 2 or 3 of this component, I can click, and because it's pinned down, it will stay at that component. Okay, I'll click here again, maybe place one more. And then whenever I'm ready to move on to the next one, I can just select it from the list and place as many of it as I'd like. Okay, I can move on to the next one, place a few of those as well. So it's just a different way of inserting components. And if I need multiple instances, this is probably your best approach. Now the last method I want to show is actually double clicking the assembly origin, right? So I just do the same thing I did before. I'm going to shift select a whole bunch of files. And what I can do is go back to the assembly tab and double click the assembly origin. Okay, so I double click there and it places all the files right on the assembly origin. Now just be careful when you do it this way, because by default it fixes each one of these components. Okay, so it's going to fix those components to the origin, and you'll have to right click float to get them to move around. So the last thing I want to go over with regards to the insert component command is what the help file refers to as improved depth. And this is just one of those things you're going to have to take my word for. It's not all that easy to show. But in previous versions of the software, if you've ever inserted a component and then rotated the model and realized the component was way out in space, that should no longer be an issue in 2013. Right? So if I use the regular insert component, I just browse and bring in a file. Right? Just browse like I've done before, bring in a file, and you place the file out here in space. Right now it looks correct. In previous versions of the software it would look correct also, but then when you placed it and then rotated, you'd realize that the part was actually shifted way out in space. Right? So I'd place the part, then I'd go to rotate the whole model, and then I would realize, oh, this part's way out here and I need to bring it back over to my assembly. In 2013, the insert component command has improved depth, and that should no longer be an issue. Okay? It should be much closer to the rest of the assembly, and that distance that you used to have, that depth away from the model that you used to have when you went to rotate it, should no longer be an issue. So that does it for part 1 of this CADcast. Please visit us at www.ddicad.com.